Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming today. Going to go ahead and get started promptly at 11. This workshop is for anyone who sells high-value stuff, so vacations to kitchens, IT systems, enterprise software, basically anything where there's a typically long consideration period and might involve multiple stakeholders in making these decisions. Unlike these companies that have people come in on the website just a few times, purchase almost immediately, have the luxury of lovely joined up analytics. This is for the people who have a considerably longer buyer journey that tends to be a little bit more complex when it comes to data. For those of you who aren't familiar, we are Search Laboratory, and we're an integrated digital marketing company who are passionate about searching for that truth in data and using that data in every decision that we make for our clients. Today's speakers, I am not going to speak much, but as an introduction, I am Lacey. I'm the Executive VP in Search Labs US. But David Howlett, our data solutions architect, he is the expert who will be leading the workshop. A couple of housekeeping items. This workshop will last 30 minutes, and we'll save some time at the end for some questions. So as we go through, feel free to post any questions you have in the chat box, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the workshop. Just a quick introduction to what we're talking about here. We're going to discover that this is all about clever use of data. Just to give you some numbers, Google, along with Boston Consulting Group, they've named this data concept the digital maturity benchmark. And they've done this to try and give a language for describing where a company is on its journey to being what they call data perfect. And from their own research, companies that do this well, Google calls them multi-moment companies. These are the companies that have a good handle on the data and they're using it well. These are typically the companies that are twice as likely to grow market share, increase revenue on average of 18%, increase cost saving on average of 29%. So it's powerful stuff, and it's proven to work. And so this workshop is all about how we do it. So I'm going to go ahead and pass over to David, let him do his thing. And like I said, we'll get to the end of the workshop and try to answer as many questions as we can.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Lacey. So just to kick straight into it, I guess, and sort of set the scene, those of you who are listening, you're probably facing one or multiple of these challenges. So when it comes to high value purchases, really, we're talking about something that has that long time to purchase. There's almost always multiple stakeholders involved, such as a partner when it comes to a holiday or a car, or maybe multiple people within the same business when it comes to B2B software. And what we're really talking about today is that disconnect between the research phase that occurs and the actual sale itself, which may completely happen offline, in fact, at the end. You've got these two bubbles of interactions that occur, and you might be joining multiple touch points within those bubbles, but you quite often find there's businesses where they have a lot of trouble justifying their investment KPIs because they're unhappy with how they have to measure those upper funnel activities. And I mean, when we say upper funnel, we think a lot about prospecting, but in some cases it might even just be PPC generic activity, and all the sales end up on PPC brand, direct, etc., and you just can't connect the two there. Now, unfortunately, the issue is actually getting worse, and that's due to technology changes such as third-party cookies, ITP, people moving to more and more cross-device activity, and alongside that, you've also got government regulations and a movement of consumer privacy awareness. And what that really means is that we're actually tracking users less than we ever have, or at least we're joining them up less across their touch points. There's a real need for consent that wasn't previously there, and as a result of that, actually building an exchange with the people that are engaging with your brand is really important. Now, we're quite fortunate that when it comes to a high value item, people are going to do a lot of research. They're going to want to engage with you multiple times, and that puts you in a position to gate that content. For instance, it might be a white paper for a B2B software company, say, or perhaps it's a brochure for a car or a holiday. If you're gating that data, you're actually offering something of value, and in return, you're getting something identifiable back, such as an email address. And you'll come on to see how that's absolutely pivotal to what we're talking about today. Now, the way we need to approach this is, first of all, we have to embrace a shift to a modeled world, and that's really saying that there's no going back at this point. We will join our day job as best we can, but sooner or later there's a black hole. There's these two bubbles that aren't connecting, and you have to model out what happens between the two. To do that, it's really important that we centralize your first-party data to really make it work for you, and we start to implement tracking solutions such as GA4 so that we're joining up as best we can. Now, to achieve that, what we recommend is that you build a data roadmap, which is to say, here's the early steps we'll take. We can get them done quick and easy and get insights out of that. But there's that utopia at the end that we want to work towards, and it's important that it's built up in stages, because otherwise it can be really hard to sell internally. And the way that we found phrasing this works best is to actually find a data pain point. And it's quite likely you've got multiple pain points within the business that could be solved with a roadmap like this, and a data engineering sort of driving you along that way. I'm going to give you an example of one later on so you can kind of see what I mean there. So what we're going to run through today is a case study of how we take a business who's most likely targeting a basic CPA across just generic leads. You know, it might be multiple different types of leads, but maybe you've said, you know, on average, we want $200 or $300 per lead, for example. It can be ROAS as well, or ROI. It doesn't really make a difference either way. And we take you on a journey of using your first-party data to first calculate static average values for those leads, but really where we want to get to is actually dynamically changing the value of a lead based on known attributes, behaviors of a person, and ultimately valuing their touch points for attribution modeling. So when we're talking about estimated value modeling, what we really mean is that when you're engaging with a business, you're giving a lot of valuable information just on how you're interacting with them. You know, from an online perspective, it's which pages are you visiting, which products are you looking at, what did you do when you were on those product pages, and on an offline perspective, it's, you know, maybe you booked a test drive for a car, or you went into a store and gave an email address or an e-receipt, etc., or picked up the phone. There's loads of online and offline touch points you're having. The real key indicators of what your likely value would be if you purchased, what the chances of you purchasing are, and maybe even what product you might purchase if you were to. And the key here is to centralize your data, and by collecting millions and millions of touch points, what you're really doing is enabling machine learning to actually work over the top of that. So to give you an example, you might be engaging with a particular brand at the moment, and there's maybe 10,000 other people that have had the same user journey that you've had up until this point. Well, we can look at what those 10,000 people went on to do and estimate the likely actions that you will take as a result of that through machine learning. It's important to stress that although we're obviously talking a lot about it from a digital perspective, we can value offline touchpoints the exact same way, and it's all part of one big user journey. So to give you an example, maybe you're a business that runs events, and when people attend those events, they give their email address. That can be tied all the way back up to a sale, and therefore a value can actually estimate it off the back of that. So really what we're talking about then, before we go into the details, is we're looking to solve attribution issues as best we can. We join it up as best we can, and we implement machine learning to solve the rest. We're getting away from those arbitrary CPA targets. We know that a lead for one person is not the same as a lead for another. So how do we differentiate that and improve how we're investing our budget online? And lastly, we've got building those top of funnel investment strategies, getting away from KPIs that are maybe hard to justify, such as traffic volume or engagement KPIs, and more to a sort of expected return on that traffic. So in the example that we're running through today, it is a travel business, and really their issue was that they came to us to build a full funnel investment strategy, and the pain point that they're dealing with is that they can't see an ROI beyond PPC brands. Similar to what we've been discussing, they've got all the issues of it's a long time to purchase, multiple stakeholders, that disconnect between research and sale. And you're in a position actually where the board's saying, well, there's a negative ROI against nearly everything that's not PPC brands, so maybe we should be pulling back. And that's where we come in, and we build a solution that actually puts visibility of value where there currently is none. So if we were to sort of play this out and talk about, well, what does a typical user journey look like? And this is what I'd really recommend you do with your business as well. You might think, well, someone comes to the homepage, more than likely they're going to work their way towards a group of products, in this case European cruises, but ultimately they're probably going to land on one particular product and start engaging with that product. Obviously there's a lot of touch points that actually happen during this, but we can't fit that all on the screen. But sooner or later they're probably going to give you some information if they're serious, whether or not it's giving their email address for a brochure, or maybe picking up the phone and giving their email address there, for example. And this is really important to us because at this point they're identifying who they are. And they're doing it just after the research phase, which means we can probably join a load of the information that happened during the research phase to this particular anchor point, and then join that anchor point all the way to the sale that maybe happens 6 months later. So the way we achieve this is that we want to build that data roadmap. We want to start small and move in increments of improving our digital maturity. So in this case, we started off by saying, well, we need to analyze both GA to get online behaviors and understand what's going on there, but also critically your CRM data. Let's actually calculate the average value per lead type. Had multiple different types of lead, but we'll focus on brochures today. So we said, though, that's not really good enough, because if you were to request a brochure for a holiday and you requested a Caribbean cruise, say, well, that's going to be worth a lot more to us than if you requested a brochure for, say, just a city break, for example. So we want to be calculating these values at more of a product category level so that we can ingest that into our digital marketing strategy. And that's exactly what we did. We plug all these different values in using SA360, so we can create a combined KPI of the different values for each different lead type. And we actually switched ourselves to a position where we're using auto bidding against an ROI for every stage of the funnel already, because we're also building a session value KPI using GA behavioral data alongside that. This is only an initial start. We know that a static value is not really where we want to be, but already we've switched away from fluffy KPIs and we're actually talking about an expected value on everything that we're doing across all our digital channels. So it might look something like this. We take this person who's had this journey so far, and we've said, actually, on average now, that brochure request for this person is worth $358.60. But we know we can do better. So what's the next stage there? Well, the next stage is where we need to get more involved now with joining that data up together. We want to enrich the data layer across the website so that when someone identifies themselves, say, giving an email address for a white paper, and we surface that client ID in GA, and we push that through to the CRM. So we can now say, of all these offline actions that occurred, here's all the online behaviors that occurred with them, right? So we've joined the online and the offline together. And whilst we're doing that, let's centralize your data. In this case, we actually pulled the CRM data into BigQuery, which is where the GA360 export exists. Of course, you've also got the GA4 export as well that's now available. And we've joined these together, and we can attribute value now across user journeys that are spanning years. If you buy today, and maybe in a lot of these cases, actually people might purchase on regular intervals, or if it's a holiday, maybe it's multiple times a year or every other year. You can start to get a view of value across a long period of time and the online and offline touch points that are occurring as they go along. Now, the first stage for us to say, as we mentioned earlier, is that we know that one lead is not the same for each person. If you spoke to a salesperson, they would be able to say, well, I think this person's more likely to purchase than that person, or they're more interested in one product than another. So we've joined up our data enough at this point where we could predict someone's value when they fill in a form fill based on what information did they give us, do we know anything about them historically, maybe they've purchased before, and what did they do online before they filled in that form, right? So we're now estimating a dynamic value per person, pushing that through into GA and Facebook for auto-bidding optimization. And to give you an example of really what that looks like, I've sort of made up this example of two quite extreme customers. On the left-hand side, we've got Sam. It's a new customer. We have no knowledge of this person up to this point. There's no offline contact with them. And we've got Rachel, who's bought with us before. In fact, actually looking at the CRM data, we know that last time they purchased, they requested a brochure 3 weeks beforehand. And let's say since it's a holiday, we actually asked them, what's the reason for the holiday? And they said it's an anniversary. So when it comes to Rachel, we know there's a real good chance if Rachel's requesting a brochure at the same time as her anniversary, she's got a high chance of converting. Now, on the left-hand side, Sam's actually requested a brochure in January. And January is important to us because that's our peak month. So naturally already we're going to improve the likelihood of success. So we're going to increase that value just because it's January compared to, let's say October. But he's requested a European cruise brochure. And the key thing I want to draw out here is that maybe we've got 100 different brochures in this case. It's certainly a lot when it comes to travel. The European one's pretty broad. There's a lot of different products in there of a lot of different value. It's not very committal at that stage, and therefore the brochure value is going to be down-weighted as a result of that. And this is, of course, it's all mathematical. This isn't assumptions. This is actual data that we're using to calculate this. Whereas on the other side, Rachel's requested a Caribbean cruise brochure that naturally has a higher conversion rate, most likely. It naturally has a higher expected value off the back of that. As you can see there in this sort of made-up scenario, I've given a much higher estimated value against Rachel there, just under $1,500. And of course, maybe the actual holiday that she might purchase is worth $6,000 or $7,000. So the lower value there is building in this idea that not everyone who requests a brochure purchases. So we've got to a stage now where we're actually dynamically valuing a lead based on a known attributes and behaviors of a person. And this might be as far as you want to go. It might not make sense to go any further than this, but it's a massive step forward for the business where you're plugging these values in and now you're optimizing your digital strategy to a predicted value of every single lead based on what we know about them. But if you do go further, the next most important thing to do is to actually surface this information from a business intelligence perspective. It's something that we always try and do is to make sure everything we surface is actionable and can be reported on. Because whilst it's great to be optimizing towards these values from like a PPC perspective, say, there's a lot more you can do around cohort analysis of, well, what's the value of all the leads that we drove in January versus February, etc. And all sorts of things we can surface with this rich information. And then once we've done that, we want to say, well, how about valuing every single touch point that that person's had rather than just the lead itself? And that's what we go on to do. So if we take our example of Sam, this is the user journey that we've said he's had. Obviously, it's naturally quite short to put it on the page. It would typically be more than 10 touch points, most likely. But as he hit the home page, we didn't know anything about Sam, so his value was really low of only 11 cents there. And what we're really saying is, well, if you drove thousands of people to the home page, some of them are going to convert, so there is value to it. There's not a lot of value. But as he keeps progressing, and this could be over multiple touch points, it could be over a singular touch point, as long as the cookie's joined over those, it's fine. We can say, well, when he looked at European cruises, he's gone into that research phase and he started to narrow down the product he's interested in. So Sam's particular value now is coming out at 86 cents, and his value is going to be different to someone else who's having the same user journey or a very similar one, just because they might be doing a few other things as they go along. But eventually he's landed on the French Riviera cruise here, and we've got a much bigger value now because he's actually picked out a high value product that we're selling. And when it comes to that brochure request, we've put that value that we showed earlier. What we didn't talk about is that he might actually go further and have a phone call. And at this stage, maybe we've calculated there's a 50% chance he purchases, and we think it'll be about $4,000. Therefore, the EV lands appropriately there. It's important to stress, of course, that this is unique to Sam, and that's how these models work. So what we've actually done here is, although it's one KPI, it's one estimated value, you've got your upper funnel activity here that's pushing this much lower value at the beginning here, your Facebook prospecting, your LinkedIn, maybe a bit of PPC generic. And whilst the values are lower, you're also driving people in much higher bulk, so it's making up for it. And then you've got your lower funnel activity here that's driving much higher estimated values here. They're driving the brochure requests, the phone calls, the sales, but obviously it costs more to actually drive them. And when we calculate these values, what we're actually doing is we push through the incremental change into GA. So that is to say, if a person had a touch point that increased their estimated value by $2, say, and you'd push that $2 into GA and say that's the expected value of that touch point there. So that's how these things work, and that's how you can use that one KPI across all the different channels in that funnel. So the outcomes of doing these models, we built a few now. The one that I've just run for you there, it drove a 14% increase in, or 14% increase in revenue there for the same ROI. Unfortunately, it launched just before COVID, and actually the performance was higher than that, but it brought it down a little as COVID hit. Which was a real shame. But the other outcomes here, which are just as equally, if not more important, is that you've got that singular KPI now across your channels. You've got away from what might be considered as fluffy or hard to defend KPIs as you go up the funnel. You've flipped to from a reactive to a proactive position, where actually a lot of businesses are sort of saying, this week's bad right now, or this month's bad right now, how do we fix it? When actually, when you look at the data, this week is probably determined several months ago. And you're actually increasing shareholder value. This was a key outcome of this, was that the business now had a piece of technology that enabled them to say what their audience was worth and what their pipeline looked like. And this was very important to them. It's important to a lot of businesses. Now, touching on that reactive versus proactive, I'm going to show you another model that we built doing the exact same thing here, but for a different client, just so you can get a real understanding of what I mean. So in front of you, you've got a sample of data here where we've taken the cohort of every new opportunity driven in September. We've said this cohort of new opportunities is worth $14.2 million. And what we do when we build these models is we actually decay values down to 0. So that's to say, if you were to engage with a particular business today, but we didn't hear from you for the next 2 months, that your value to that business would be decaying down to 0. We thought you had a value, it turned out you didn't. We want to get you off the books. And the reason we do that is because it gives a business a view of their current available pipeline, what's in it right now. And we run these models daily, so every day that's going to decay if nothing else happens. Now, obviously, there's more that happens than just decay. You might actually purchase, and in that case, you're no longer an estimated value, you're an actualized value. So let's put that data in too. And what you can see is we took a cohort of people in September. We said, we think they're going to be worth $14 million, and we followed those same people throughout their lifespan here, and they go on 6 months later to be worth $14 million. And that's enabling a business to be very flexible, where they can invest today based on an expected future and also track if that future occurs. Because obviously it's very easy to put a number on things. You need to make sure you're right, or at least in the right ballpark, so that you can make real business decisions there. So aside from that, really what we're doing here is that there's 2 views you have of the world. So you've got 2 different color bars here. If you were to look at the dark blue bars here, you've got your leads, your touch point volumes, which might be things like clicks, sessions, or offline footfall through to a store, for example. That's probably the view that you've got today, right? So you've got Meta in this case. It's not driving many leads compared to your search Ads 360. You've got a high value to in-store contact, but not so much chat contact, for example. And you've probably got some content on your website that drives a lot of form fills. When we run these models, however, we're actually measuring the impact of a touch point, and that changes things significantly. So you'll probably find channels like Meta, for example, actually have a very high estimated value per session despite their low volume of leads, because they're driving those initial touch points, that research phase. And you'll probably find the content that's driving all those form fills isn't necessarily driving all the actual research value. We quite often find actually that there'll be particular pieces of content that, whilst they drive loads of forms, it's the wrong people filling them in. And you've got a PPC team that's optimizing towards it because they have no information to tell them that. And that's the real power of building these kind of models. So what I recommend that you do, so the first thing you want to do is you want to be thinking, what's my data pain point? And really that's saying, what disconnect do I have between my board objectives and my digital marketing, or even just all marketing for that matter? These are 3 quite common ones. So defining investment KPIs about visibility of results. That's a classic case of what we just run through there, where you might have a session volume that you're trying to achieve through Facebook prospecting, for example, because you can't get a sale against it. And obviously that's a real disconnect between actual results. Or you might have disconnected business KPIs where the business is operating on a profit, new customer acquisition in the boardroom, but in the channels you've got revenue and transactions. And we know when we do these projects that if we calculate margin, delivery costs, lifetime value, returns rates, etc., that profit and revenue do not always land in the same place, particularly against individual products. And lastly, you've got ineffective pivoting to customer first approaches there. And what we're saying really is you might be talking internally about how you want to change a message based on known attributes of a user or a customer. But to do that, you actually have to centralize your data. You have to start using machine learning to predict what will that person do next, so that you can actually tailor your message and put them in the appropriate audience bucket accordingly. This is what our data roadmap looks like. This is the finished view that I sort of whizzed through there. And ultimately what we suggest you do is you get to a stage like this where you've got your early walking stages that can be achieved really probably within a matter of months or even weeks. You've got your run phase there where you're centralizing your data, you're really building your foundations, and then sprinting is actioning what you've done there, making the most out of that infrastructure that you've built. Of course, if you need any help with that, please do get in touch. This is sort of the thing we live and breathe, so we're more than happy to talk about this. And that's all from me. I've gone through that quite quick, but I'll pass on to Lacey now as well.
Great, thank you so much for that, David. Thank you for all the information. As mentioned, I'm just going to run through some of the questions that we've had throughout the bit. Bear with me. Okay, so first question that we have here is, what is the process you go through to build your data roadmap?
Sure. So when it comes to data roadmap, you want to be thinking, what is the problem I'm trying to solve? What problem do I have right now? It's most likely something that isn't immediately obvious that it's necessarily a data engineering issue, but you start there, for instance, I'm being given a profit target, but my channels are in revenue. That is a data problem. It's a pain point for yourself. Then you build that roadmap of easy steps through to utopia of how you're going to achieve that and maximize solving that problem.
Perfect. Next question, is it possible to tie up LinkedIn into all of this?
Yeah, absolutely. The model that I just ran through actually did have LinkedIn involved in that. You can't necessarily do things like pushing values through in the same way, but what you can do is still surface. These are the forms that came through LinkedIn. They never even hit the website, but we've joined those people together. And through BI, you can surface the value of LinkedIn campaigns and different audiences, etc., to enable you to sort of build a more robust digital strategy there.
Okay. And next question, where you have multiple people buying the same thing, but they're different stakeholders, how do you join them together?
Sure. So we see this a lot, in particular with B2B, where there might be multiple stakeholders within a business that all actually download a white paper, for example, and they've given their email address. What happens in these situations is the moment they've all identified themselves, we'll go through what's called sort of fuzzy matching. So it'll be things like what's their address, what's their business name, things like that enable us to join people together and say, actually, that's all one person. Now, there's obviously a load of actions they're taking before we've managed to join them there. You know, they've clicked around the website, they've been given values. But by the nature of how sort of the maths falls out as we calculate these, we're already calculating values on a taking into account that duplication that occurs there, if that makes sense.
Great. I think that is all the questions that we have for you today. I guess for everybody else that joined, thank you guys so much. If you have any additional questions, want to know more about what we've done for our clients and how we can kind of help you build your data roadmap, definitely reach out to us, check out our website, and we'll be happy to help. But thank you guys so much for joining, and I hope you have a good rest of the week.
Awesome. Thank you very much.